Friends, colleagues, and fellow citizens, what we are witnessing today is nothing short of a historic geopolitical tremor. The announcement of Russia's new Oreshnik missile system has sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Washington, Brussels, and beyond. NATO's strategic posture, long seen as the bedrock of Western military dominance, is suddenly showing cracks, and this event, my friends, is not just about a missile. It is about the shifting architecture of global power and the unraveling of the very order the West thought would last forever. You see, for decades, NATO operated under the assumption that its technological superiority guaranteed security. But Russia's unveiling of the Oreshnik, a missile capable of reaching hypersonic speeds, evading radar detection, and neutralizing existing defense systems, has thrown that confidence into disarray. Overnight, the language inside Western think tanks has changed. Words like deterrence, dominance, and containment are being replaced with vulnerability, uncertainty, and recalibration. This is not just a technological leap, it is a political earthquake. But let's step back. Why is this happening now? Because history never pauses for the comfortable. When nations like the United States and its European allies concentrate wealth, power, and decision-making into the hands of a few corporate and military elites, they begin to decay from within. While Western economies stagnate under inequality, and their citizens struggle with inflation, housing, and declining trust in institutions, other nations, once dismissed as secondary powers, are investing in science, education, and strategic defense. Russia, like China, has learned that the path to sovereignty in the 21st century does not run through Wall Street. It runs through innovation and independence. NATO's dilemma today is not only military, it's ideological. For decades, Western leaders sold their citizens the illusion that capitalism, globalized and deregulated, would ensure peace and prosperity. Yet, as their economies hollowed out and their industries offshored, they became dependent on fragile supply chains and foreign resources. In that vacuum, the West's military might become the last pillar holding up its illusion of supremacy. Now, even that pillar is shaking. The Oreshnik missile is a symbol of that shift, a technological manifestation of political reality. The West no longer holds a monopoly on power. And Europe, well, Europe now finds itself in a dangerous position. On one hand, it relies on NATO's security umbrella, on American leadership, on the myth of Western unity. On the other, it faces the real economic and social costs of endless confrontation. Energy prices, trade disruptions, refugee crisis. These are the consequences of aligning policies not with European interests, but with Washington's strategic ambitions. The Oreshnik missile, in this sense, is more than a weapon. It's a mirror. It reflects back to Europe the unsustainable contradictions of its foreign policy. Let me be clear. I am not here to glorify military escalation. Every missile, every warhead represents resources that could have been used to house the homeless, to educate the young, to heal the sick. But as an economist and historian, I must also tell you, power abhors a vacuum. When one empire declines, another emerges. The Western alliance, rather than confronting that reality with diplomacy, continues to double down on militarization, sanctions, and propaganda. That is not a strategy, it is a symptom of decline. What we are seeing now through the lens of this missile is the beginning of a multipolar world. And that frightens those who have lived too long believing that their dominance was destiny. But for the rest of the world, for nations tired of being dictated to, exploited, or bombed in the name of freedom, this moment may represent something new, a chance to reset global power on more equitable terms. The challenge for humanity is whether we let fear dictate our future or whether we find the courage to cooperate, to share, and to finally build systems that serve people, not profit. So I say to you, as I close, don't be distracted by the headlines or the sensationalism. The Oreshnik missile may have stunned NATO, But what should truly stun us is how fragile the Western order has become under its own contradictions. The story of this moment is not about rockets in the sky. It's about economies on the brink, politics in denial, and societies desperate for a new vision of security, one based not on domination, but on justice. And unless we face that truth, no missile defense system on Earth will be able to protect us from the consequences of our own arrogance. Russia's unveiling of the Oreshnik missile sent a geopolitical thunderclap across the world, a shock that jolted not only military strategists, but also economists, diplomats, and policymakers. The mere announcement of this missile has reshaped the psychological map of global defense. Imagine a single technological innovation capable of shaking an alliance that has dominated the planet's military affairs for over 70 years. That is what the Oreshnik has done. It is not merely a weapon. It is a statement, a declaration that the era of uncontested Western military superiority may be drawing to an end. What makes this development so riveting is not only the missile's capacity for destruction, but the meaning it carries for global power balance and economic strategy. The Oreshnik's capabilities, though wrapped in secrecy, are already the subject of feverish speculation. Reports suggest it can travel at hypersonic speeds, potentially exceeding Mach 10, rendering existing missile defense systems obsolete. It maneuvers unpredictably in flight, eluding radar and intercept technologies that NATO has invested billions in developing. Its range and precision appear to allow it to strike deep within European or transatlantic territories without early detection. The West's confidence, built on the assumption that advanced missile shields could neutralize any threat, has been shattered. The Oreshnik is not just a technological marvel. It is a geopolitical message from Moscow to Washington and Brussels. We are back in the game, and this time you cannot ignore us. For decades, NATO nations have relied on their presumed edge in innovation and defense infrastructure. The United States, in particular, viewed its technological dominance as the cornerstone of deterrence. Yet, the unveiling of this missile has forced Western analysts to confront an uncomfortable reality. Russia's military, scientific complex has quietly leapfrogged several Western defense programs. Behind the veil of sanctions, economic isolation, and political demonization, Russia has been investing in innovation that directly targets Western vulnerabilities. The Oreshnik, therefore, symbolizes not just a military leap, but a strategic revenge against years of underestimation. It is the culmination of a doctrine rooted in resilience, self-sufficiency, and national pride, a reminder that even under economic pressure, nations driven by existential purpose can innovate beyond expectations. What makes this revelation even more explosive is the timing. The West is facing deep divisions economically, politically, and socially. Inflation is eroding trust in governments. Defense budgets are ballooning while social programs shrink. In this environment, the Oreshnik missile does more than challenge NATO's defense. It tests its unity. Each European nation now has to calculate its risk independently, how much it can rely on American protection, and how much exposure it is willing to tolerate in case of escalation. The illusion of absolute security, once guaranteed by NATO's technological dominance, has vanished overnight. The missile, in essence, acts as a psychological equalizer. It reminds every European policymaker that geography still matters, that power projection has consequences, and that alliances cannot substitute for genuine security. The Oreshnik's debut has also injected an element of unpredictability into international diplomacy. Suddenly, every negotiation involving Russia, whether about energy, trade, or sanctions, comes with an unspoken understanding of renewed military leverage. This is not the Cold War redux, but something far subtler, a world where deterrence is multidimensional, where economic policy, technology, and military power converge into a single equation of influence. Western leaders who once dismissed Russia as a fading petrostate are now being forced to acknowledge that it has re-emerged as a sophisticated power player. The Oreshnik missile is the visible tip of that transformation, a reminder that innovation is not the monopoly of the wealthy, but the weapon of the determined. And here lies the most powerful hook. The Oreshnik's true impact is not measured in kilotons or speed, but in perception. It alters how the world sees power itself. It demonstrates that even in a system designed to contain and control, breakthroughs can emerge from the periphery and rewrite the rules. NATO, for all its resources and influence, is now reacting rather than dictating. The psychological shift from dominance to defense is perhaps the most profound consequence of this event. What Russia has achieved beyond military surprise is a redefinition of strategic confidence, a signal to both allies and adversaries that global power is no longer predictable, and that the future may belong to those who dare to innovate under pressure, not those who merely rest on the legacy of past victories. NATO now finds itself in a moment of reckoning, unlike any it has faced since the end of the Cold War. The debut of Russia's Oreshnik missile has thrown the alliance into a storm of strategic confusion and urgent recalibration. Behind closed doors, in the fortified rooms of Brussels and Washington, military planners and political leaders are struggling with one question that cuts through every layer of their defense doctrine. What if the balance of power has already shifted and NATO didn't see it coming? The missile's revelation has not only challenged the technical limits of NATO's defensive infrastructure, but also exposed a deeper problem, the complacency that comes from decades of dominance. For an alliance that once saw itself as untouchable, this shock has the potential to redefine its very identity. Inside NATO's command structures, the mood is no longer one of confidence, but controlled panic. Hypersonic weapons like the Oreshnik travel so fast and so unpredictably that they render traditional air and missile defense systems nearly useless. Every simulation run by NATO analysts ends the same way: detection too late, interception impossible, damage inevitable. These findings are not just military data points, they are existential alarms. NATO's integrated defense network, built around systems like the Aegis and Patriot interceptors, was designed to counter conventional ballistic threats, not agile, radar-defying weapons. The Oreshnik, by bypassing these systems entirely, exposes a critical vulnerability that the alliance's most expensive and sophisticated defenses may no longer guarantee the safety of its member nations. But the problem is not only technical, it is political. For years, NATO has relied on unity as its greatest strength. Yet, when confronted with a threat that directly targets Europe's security, that unity begins to fracture. Some nations call for more American protection. Others quietly question whether the U.S. can still be the ultimate shield. Eastern European members, living closest to Russia's borders, feel the tension most acutely. They are demanding stronger deterrence measures, more troops, and faster missile deployments. Meanwhile, Western European states, already burdened by inflation, energy crisis, and growing anti-war sentiment, are wary of being dragged deeper into confrontation. In this atmosphere, every meeting between defense ministers becomes a delicate balancing act between fear and fatigue. The Oreshnik has done more than challenge NATO's defense systems. It has pierced its political cohesion. What makes this development even more striking is how swiftly it has altered the tone of Western defense discourse. Only months ago, NATO's public statements projected unwavering dominance and deterrence. Now, the language has shifted. Phrases like strategic vulnerability and need for modernization dominate policy reports. Military analysts speak cautiously about gaps in detection capability, and the word hypersonic has become synonymous with uncertainty. Behind every official statement of reassurance lies an unspoken acknowledgement NATO's current systems are not prepared for this kind of warfare. The alliance that once dictated the terms of global security is now being forced to adapt to a battlefield where its assumptions no longer hold true. This sudden vulnerability has also exposed NATO's dependency on the United States. Washington's defense industry remains the backbone of the alliance, but even American systems are struggling to keep pace with new global realities. The cost of developing effective countermeasures runs into hundreds of billions of dollars, an amount few European countries are willing or able to commit amid growing domestic pressures. Every dollar spent on missile defense is a dollar not spent on public welfare, infrastructure, or energy transition. And as citizens across Europe feel the economic pain of prolonged geopolitical tension, public support for militarization is beginning to erode. This is the silent crisis within NATO, the growing divide between political necessity and public patience. The most striking hook in this unfolding drama is that NATO, long the architect of global deterrence, has become the one being deterred. The alliance that once projected power now finds itself forced into a defensive crouch, rethinking not only its technology, but its philosophy of security. The Oreshnik missile has revealed that the age of Western military dominance cannot be sustained by legacy systems or outdated doctrines. Power is no longer about who spends the most, but who innovates the fastest. And in this race, the West's bureaucratic inertia is proving to be its greatest weakness. In truth, what NATO is confronting is not just a new weapon, but a new world, one in which military parity is becoming the norm and psychological superiority can vanish overnight. The Oreshnik's launch didn't just light up the skies over Russia, it illuminated the fault lines within NATO itself. Every meeting, every defense review, every statement of reassurance now carries the echo of that realization. The game has changed and the old rules no longer apply. The question haunting NATO's leadership is not whether they can respond, but whether they can adapt quickly enough to survive in a world where the balance of fear has been recalibrated and the future no longer belongs to those who react, but to those who anticipate. Across Europe, the unveiling of Russia's Oreshnik missile has triggered not only strategic alarm, but a deep, unsettling sense of vulnerability that is spreading through political circles and public consciousness alike. What was once distant geopolitical tension has now landed at Europe's doorstep with chilling proximity. The missile's capabilities, its speed, unpredictability, and potential to bypass Western defense systems have shattered the illusion of safety that European nations had clung to under NATO's security umbrella. Beneath the formal statements of solidarity and calm assurance from Brussels, there is a quiet but unmistakable anxiety. What if the continent is no longer as secure as it believes? That single thought, whispered behind closed doors, is slowly reshaping Europe's political landscape. Governments across the continent are now forced to reckon with a new reality, one where the long assumed balance of power is tipping and where the comfort of US-led protection no longer feels guaranteed. In capitals like Berlin, Paris, Warsaw, and Rome, security councils have convened emergency briefings, defense budgets are being reconsidered, and intelligence agencies are racing to assess just how much the Oreshnik missile changes their strategic equations. The old consensus that NATO's shield was impenetrable is beginning to crumble, and this realization carries consequences that reach far beyond the military sphere. It touches the very heart of Europe's economic and political stability. The continent is already wrestling with multiple crises, high inflation, social unrest, energy instability, and a growing sense of political fatigue among its citizens. The war in Ukraine has stretched resources thin, driven energy costs sky high, and divided public opinion. Now, with the Oreshnik missile entering the equation, many Europeans are asking whether the endless cycle of confrontation is sustainable. In countries like Germany and France, Citizens are beginning to question whether aligning unquestioningly with Washington's strategic goals truly serves Europe's best interests. The fear of escalation, of Europe becoming the front line of a potential new arms race, is palpable. Every new piece of military news from the East sends ripples through European media, markets, and parliaments. The unease is not just about defense, it is about direction. This anxiety is most visible in Eastern Europe, where the proximity to Russia turns fear into urgency. Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states are calling for stronger deterrence, demanding more NATO troops and expanded missile defense systems. Yet these same moves risk escalating tensions further, fueling a security dilemma where every action taken for protection appears as provocation to the other side. Western Europe, on the other hand, is showing signs of hesitation. Countries like Italy and Spain, already struggling with economic strain and political polarization, are wary of deeper military commitments. This divergence in approach reveals a growing fault line within Europe, a division between those who seek confrontation and those who seek caution. The Oreshnik missile, in this way, has done something no weapon should have the power to do. It has tested Europe's unity as much as its security. Adding to the unease is Europe's dependence on external power structures. For decades, the continent outsourced its defense assurance to the United States, believing that Washington's technological and military dominance would forever guarantee safety. Now, as new realities emerge, that dependency feels increasingly fragile. The U.S. has its own strategic interests to balance, its own political divisions to manage, and its own economic challenges to confront. Europe, long shielded by American power, must now face the uncomfortable prospect of taking responsibility for its own defense in an era of unpredictable threats. The Oreshnik missile, therefore, is not just a wake-up call about Russian capabilities. It is a reminder of European dependency and the urgent need for self-reliance. And yet, perhaps the most profound impact of this development lies not in military circles, but in the minds of ordinary Europeans. There is an emotional undercurrent sweeping through the continent, a sense that the post-war promise of peace, prosperity, and predictability is beginning to fade. The generation that grew up believing in a stable, integrated, and secure Europe is now facing headlines filled with words like deterrence, arms race, and hypersonic threat. The psychological distance between the average citizen and the machinery of global power has collapsed. Suddenly, decisions made in Moscow, Washington, or Brussels no longer feel abstract. They feel immediate, personal, and perilous. Here lies the most gripping hook of this moment. Europe is not only on edge because of the Oreshnik missile. It is on edge because it is realizing how fragile its peace truly is. For years, Europeans took comfort in the idea that war was something that happened elsewhere to other people in other times. The missile's unveiling has shattered that complacency. It is a symbol of how quickly the security landscape can shift and how unprepared even the most advanced societies can be when history decides to accelerate. The fear now gripping Europe is not just the fear of Russian power, it is the fear of losing control over its own destiny in a world that no longer plays by the old rules. The emergence of Russia's Oreshnik missile is far more than a display of military innovation. It is a stark symbol of a deeper global shift, the unmistakable end of Western monopoly over power, technology, and influence. For decades, the West, anchored by the United States and its NATO allies, believed that its economic might and technological superiority formed an unshakable foundation of global dominance. But with one missile launch, that assumption has been thrown into question. The Oreshnik stands not merely as a weapon, but as a statement, an emblem of a multipolar world that is no longer waiting for permission to assert itself. The old order built on Western supremacy is eroding, and those who once dictated the rules of the global system are now being forced to compete within it. What makes this moment historically significant is not just the missile's speed or sophistication, but the geopolitical message it carries. The West's dominance for much of the modern era was based on two key advantages: control of finance and control of force. The US dollar-shaped economies, NATO-shaped security, but now Russia and other emerging powers are dismantling those pillars one breakthrough at a time. The Oreshnik missile challenges the second pillar directly. It exposes that the monopoly on advanced military deterrence is gone. No longer can the West rely solely on its technology to maintain global control. Power, once centralized in Washington and Brussels, is dispersing across new centers: Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, and beyond. This shift is irreversible, and the Oreshnik serves as the visible marker of that transition. Behind this transformation lies years of Western overconfidence. Believing their dominance to be permanent, Western nations funneled resources into financial speculation and consumer economies while allowing manufacturing and defense innovation to stagnate. They underestimated nations that were quietly building resilience, investing in science, education, and domestic industries under the pressure of sanctions and exclusion. Russia, in particular, turned adversity into strategy. Its isolation became its forge. The Oreshnik missile is not a product of abundance, but of necessity. It embodies a lesson that history keeps teaching the complacent. Those who face pressure adapt, and those who feel secure often decay. The West's monopoly was never meant to last forever. It was merely sustained by inertia until someone dared to challenge it. Now, the geopolitical map is redrawn not through treaties or summits, but through innovation. The Oreshnik's existence sends a clear signal to the world's capitals. Technological sovereignty is the new currency of power. The days when the United States could dictate military balance by sheer spending are over. The global South, long marginalized, is watching closely. Nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America see in Russia's achievement a powerful example that the age of Western tutelage may be coming to an end. The missile is more than a defense mechanism. It's a psychological victory for those who have lived for generations under Western dominance. A reminder that technological revolution can come from anywhere, not just Silicon Valley or the Pentagon. Within Western institutions, the response to this reality has been a mix of disbelief and denial. Policy papers now use words like strategic parity and competitive balance, euphemisms for what was once unthinkable. The West no longer holds uncontested superiority. Think tanks that once forecast the permanence of American leadership are now producing reports on managing decline. The Oreshnik missile has, in essence, forced the West to look into the mirror of history, a reflection that reveals its own overreach, its internal divisions, and its eroding credibility. Every time NATO speaks of containing other powers, it only highlights how much its influence has already diminished. The once unquestioned authority of the Western Alliance is now being contested not only on the battlefield, but in the realm of global perception. The most compelling hook in this unfolding story is that this is not just a military shift, it is a philosophical one. The world is watching the dismantling of a narrative that has dominated for centuries, that progress, security, and innovation belong exclusively to the West. The Oreshnik missile symbolizes a turning point where that narrative fractures. It announces that other civilizations with different systems and different values are fully capable of redefining what power looks like. And the reaction from the West, marked by anxiety, disbelief, and hurried strategy reviews, only confirms how unprepared it was for this reckoning. The monopoly of dominance is ending not with a treaty, but with a roar from the East, a reminder that the age of empires has given way to the age of equals. The old guardians of order are now learning what it feels like to live in a world they no longer control, and the rest of humanity is witnessing history's quiet but unstoppable rebalancing of power. The aftermath of Russia's Oreshnik missile unveiling has sent ripples far beyond military circles, shaking the economic and political foundations of the Western world. What began as a defense development has quickly transformed into a moment of reckoning for the financial markets, policymakers, and governments that have long relied on the illusion of Western invulnerability. The shock is not only about Russia's technological achievement, but about what it reveals: the growing fragility of economies built on endless militarization, the widening gap between political rhetoric and public reality, and the uncomfortable truth that dominance carries a cost that is no longer sustainable. The Oreshnik missile, in this sense, has detonated not on the battlefield, but in the balance sheets and political chambers of Western democracies. Financial markets, notoriously sensitive to geopolitical shocks, reacted immediately to the news. Defense stocks spiked, energy markets trembled, and investors began to reevaluate the risks of prolonged instability in Europe. But behind the temporary surges lies a deeper unease. Western economies, already weighed down by inflation and mounting debt, are realizing that the new arms race could drain them even further. Governments that once promised social investment are now redirecting billions toward defense modernization, hypersonic research, and missile countermeasure programs. This shift is not driven by strategy, but by fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of exposure, fear of losing control over a world they once commanded. Every budget reallocation toward the military comes at a social cost, deepening inequality and fueling public discontent that political leaders can no longer ignore. The Oreshnik missile has exposed an uncomfortable paradox at the heart of Western governance. The very pursuit of security is now undermining internal stability. Citizens across Europe and North America are questioning why, amid economic hardship, their governments continue to pour resources into confrontation rather than cooperation. Protests in major cities, political polarization, and declining trust in institutions are symptoms of a larger disease: the loss of faith in leadership. Each new geopolitical escalation tightens the financial noose, and ordinary people are the ones who feel it first. Energy bills rise, food prices climb, and wages stagnate while defense spending soars. The Oreshnik has inadvertently become a mirror reflecting the West's misplaced priorities. This situation is especially dire in Europe, where economies are still reeling from the energy crisis triggered by the conflict in Ukraine. Many European nations, already dependent on imported resources, are now bracing for further instability. The need to increase military readiness only compounds their economic strain. Leaders face a painful dilemma: how to sustain public confidence while demanding greater sacrifices in the name of security. Every televised speech, every parliamentary debate carries the same undertone of urgency, but also of quiet desperation. The Oreshnik missile has given Russia leverage that extends beyond military might. It has handed Moscow an economic weapon, one that forces the West to spend itself into exhaustion. In Washington, the political implications are no less profound. The U.S. defense establishment, long accustomed to dictating the pace of global arms development, now faces the embarrassment of being outpaced. Calls for increased defense budgets echo through Congress, even as economists warn of unsustainable deficits. The contradiction is glaring. The more the West spends to restore its dominance, the more it undermines the financial stability that once sustained it. The Oreshnik missile has thus triggered a vicious cycle: military insecurity driving economic overreach, economic strain fueling political instability, and political instability eroding the moral authority that the West depends on to lead. The most powerful hook in this unfolding drama is that the true explosion caused by the Oreshnik missile is not visible, it is economic. The weapon itself may never be fired, yet it is already detonating confidence, shaking currencies, and rattling alliances. Investors, analysts, and citizens alike sense a turning point, a quiet but undeniable shift in the hierarchy of global power. The missile's existence forces a question that few in the West dare to ask publicly. Can a system built on perpetual dominance survive when it must constantly outspend its rivals to feel secure? The answer, though unspoken, hangs heavy in the air. The Oreshnik has become more than a missile. It is a catalyst exposing the unsustainable foundations of Western policy, where economic strength is sacrificed for political image and the pursuit of superiority leads only to self-inflicted decline. The world is watching as Western leaders scramble to respond, not with confidence, but with calculation, aware that every move they make to counter this new threat may bring them one step closer to the limits of their own endurance. The rise of Russia's Oreshnik missile has done more than provoke fear. It has reignited a critical conversation about the collapse of diplomacy in an age where confrontation has become the default language of power. Across capitals, diplomats and policymakers now find themselves facing a haunting question. How did the world allow itself to return to the brink of a new arms race after decades of lessons learned from the Cold War? The answer lies not in the missile's engineering, but in the failure of dialogue. The Oreshnik missile is not simply a technological triumph. It is a symptom of a diplomatic breakdown that has been years in the making. In the absence of genuine cooperation and mutual respect among major powers, the world has drifted back into a dangerous rhythm, one where every scientific achievement becomes a weapon, every advancement a threat, and every negotiation a battlefield of pride. The Oreshnik's unveiling was a message from Moscow, but the echo it created was global. For Russia, it was a demonstration of sovereignty, a response to decades of Western encirclement and sanctions. For NATO, it was a challenge, a reminder that deterrence can no longer be one-sided. Yet, for the rest of the world, it was a warning, a signal that diplomacy has failed to keep pace with technological escalation. Once, great powers used negotiation to prevent catastrophe. Today, they use intimidation to gain leverage. The missile's shock value reflects the vacuum left by diplomacy's decay. Where treaties once restrained ambition, suspicion now fuels it. The West's refusal to engage on equal terms with rivals has led to a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more it isolates, the more it provokes resistance, and the more that resistance evolves into power. This is the paradox haunting global politics. The more nations invest in weapons for security, the less secure the world becomes. Each side justifies escalation as defense, but defense without diplomacy is merely preparation for disaster. The Oreshnik missile did not emerge in isolation. It was born out of an environment poisoned by mistrust. Every sanction, every broken agreement, every act of geopolitical manipulation has contributed to this moment. What makes this development so alarming is not the missile's existence, but the silence that followed its announcement. No emergency summits, no new dialogue frameworks, no calls for arms control renewal, only reactions of fear, condemnation, and retaliation. The leaders of the world are acting as though this is just another round in a political game, forgetting that history has shown us where unchecked rivalry leads. The West, long accustomed to dictating the terms of global diplomacy, now finds itself struggling to adapt to a multipolar world where it no longer sets the agenda. Traditional mechanisms of dialogue like the United Nations, the OSCE, and bilateral arms agreements have lost their influence, replaced by fragmented alliances and competitive blocs. The failure to sustain diplomacy with Russia after the Cold War has turned into one of the greatest strategic miscalculations of the modern era. Instead of integrating Moscow into a cooperative security framework, the West chose containment. Instead of partnership, it pursued dominance, and in doing so, it planted the seeds for the very crisis it now faces. The Oreshnik missile is a manifestation of that failure, a signal that the age of unilateral control has ended and that ignoring the diplomatic route has consequences that no defense system can intercept. What makes this moment especially dangerous is that it arrives at a time when global leadership is fragmented and public trust in institutions is collapsing. Populism, misinformation, and political polarization have made rational diplomacy a rare commodity. Leaders are increasingly guided by short-term political gain rather than long-term peace. The media amplifies fear instead of fostering understanding. The result is a world where escalation feels inevitable and dialogue feels impossible. The Oreshnik missile is being discussed not as a trigger for negotiation, but as justification for further militarization. This inversion of logic, responding to threat with more threat, has become the hallmark of modern politics, a cycle that feeds itself until it becomes unstoppable. Here lies the most compelling hook in this entire drama. The Oreshnik missile, for all its technological brilliance, is ultimately a monument to diplomatic failure. It stands as proof that when nations stop listening, they start arming. It is not a weapon of offense, but a weapon of warning, a sign that the institutions designed to prevent global conflict are losing their relevance in a world governed by pride, propaganda, and profit. If there is one message that echoes louder than the missile's roar, it is this: without dialogue, power becomes blind, and blind power, history reminds us, always leads to ruin. The world now stands at a crossroads: either rediscover the art of diplomacy or continue racing toward a future where every nation's security is built on fear, and every breakthrough brings humanity one step closer to the edge.